Somewhere in a locked museum cabinet right now sits a slim metal rod, no bigger than a pencil, with a wooden handle and a fine pointed tip. It looks almost harmless. It was designed to be hammered through the corner of your eye socket and swept back and forth inside your skull while you were awake. And the man who invented it performed it on thousands of people, some of them barely more than children, in his lifetime. That is just one of the objects on this list. Medicine has left behind a graveyard of tools, devices, and contraptions so disturbing that most of them have been quietly hidden away where the public can't see them. Today we're opening the cabinet. These are 10 of the most disturbing objects in medical history. And the true stories of why each one exists are far worse than the objects themselves. A quick warning before we go further. This one is grim, and every object here is real. Let's begin, and we'll count our way down to the very worst of them. Number 10. The Tobacco Smoke Enema Kit. In the 1700s and 1800s, if you were pulled from a river half drowned, one of the first things a rescuer might reach for was a set of bellows and a length of tube. The tube did not go in your mouth, it went in the other end. And then they pumped warm tobacco smoke directly into your bowels, in the genuine medical belief that the warmth and the nicotine would stir your body back to life. Kits for exactly this purpose were mounted along the banks of the River Thames, the way we mount life rings today. It sounds like a joke, and it may well be where we get a certain rude phrase about blowing smoke somewhere unpleasant. But it was deadly serious medicine, practiced for decades, until doctors finally realized that forcing tobacco into a dying body did precisely nothing to save it. Number 9. The tooth key. Before the dentist's drill, before anesthesia, there was this. A short iron bar with a claw on one end that looked disturbingly like a device for turning a lock. And in a sense, it was. The claw was hooked over the rotten tooth, braced against the gum, and then the whole thing was twisted sideways in one violent motion to lever the tooth clean out of the jaw. When it worked, it was agony. When it didn't, and it often didn't, it shattered the tooth, tore the gum, and not infrequently broke the patient's jaw outright. For the better part of 2 centuries, this crude lever was the height of dental care, and every single person who felt it was wide awake. Number 8. The Cautery Iron. For thousands of years, one of medicine's answers to a wound, a growth, or a bleed was heat. And not gentle heat. A rod of iron was held in the fire until it glowed, and then it was pressed directly onto living flesh to burn a wound closed, to seal a bleeding vessel, or to destroy whatever the physician wanted gone. The searing did sometimes stop a patient bleeding to death, which is exactly why it endured for so long. But it meant that countless people, fully conscious, had to be held down while red-hot metal was pressed into their bodies and the room filled with smoke. It was one of the oldest tools in medicine and one of the most feared. Number 7. The Scarificator. We've all heard that old doctors drained people's blood, but few of us picture the machine they built to do it faster. The Scarificator was a small brass box that fit in the palm of the hand, and hidden inside it were rows of spring-loaded blades. The physician pressed it to your skin, released a catch, and a dozen blades snapped out and sliced into your flesh all at once in a fraction of a second. It was invented to make bloodletting quicker and more efficient, to take more blood from more patients in less time. And when the blades weren't enough, they turned to the living alternative. Jars of leches, kept by the thousands, applied to the skin to drink the patient dry. An entire industry grew up around draining human beings of the one thing keeping them alive. Number 6. The Plague Doctor's Mask. You have almost certainly seen it. The long, curved bird's beak, the round glass eyes, the black, hooded coat. It has become a symbol of horror, but it was never meant to frighten. In the 1600s, physicians who treated plague victims believed the disease traveled through foul, poisoned air. So they packed the long beak of the mask with dried flowers, herbs, and spices, convinced that breathing through this fragrant filter would keep the sickness out. It did nothing. The doctors who wore it walked among the dying, breathing the same air as everyone else, protected by nothing but perfume and a theory. The mask that has haunted our nightmares for 4 centuries was, in truth, a symbol of just how little anyone understood, and of how many died anyway. If the contents of this cabinet are getting under your skin, take a second to subscribe. Pulling the grimmest, most forgotten objects out of medicine's past is the entire reason this channel exists. And stay with us, because from here on, the objects stop being crude and start being cruel. Number 5. The Mercury Fumigation Box. For centuries, one disease terrified people above almost all others, and there was no cure, only this. The patient was stripped and sealed inside a wooden cabinet, with only their head sticking out the top, and beneath them, a dish of mercury was heated until it filled the box with toxic silver vapor. They would sit there, breathing it, sweating in it, for hours. The idea was that the mercury would drive the disease out through the sweat and the drool. What it actually did was slowly poison them, rotting their teeth, loosening them from their gums, wrecking their nerves and their minds. It gave rise to a grim old saying, a night with Venus and a lifetime with Mercury. The cure, quite literally, was often worse than the disease. Number 4. The Chamberlen Forceps. This object is disturbing not for what it did, but for what its owners chose to do with it. Sometime around the 1600s, a family of physicians named Chamberlen invented a pair of curved metal tongs that could safely lift a stuck baby out during a difficult birth. A genuine, life-saving miracle for an age when obstructed labor killed both mother and child. And they kept it a secret. For roughly a century and a half, the Chamberlens hid their invention to protect it as a family business. They carried it into the birthing room in a locked, ornate box. They blindfolded the mother, cleared everyone else out, and worked under a sheet so that no one could ever see the device. And while they guarded their profitable secret, generation after generation of women and infants died in births that this simple tool could have saved. It is one of the coldest things in this entire cabinet, a cure for mass suffering, deliberately withheld for money. Number 3. The Utica Crib. Step now into the 19th century asylum. Among the chains and the restraints, one object stands out for its sheer quiet horror. A wooden bed, waist-high, completely enclosed on all sides and across the top with slatted bars, and a lid that latched shut. It was, unmistakably, a cage, built to the size of an adult human being. Patients deemed difficult or restless were locked inside and left there, unable to sit up, unable to turn over, sometimes for days at a time. It was presented as a humane form of restraint, a kindness even. But look at it, and you see the truth. A grown person folded into a locked box because it was easier than caring for them. Many who went into these cribs never fully came out of them, in mind or in body. Number 2. The iron lung. By the 1940s and 50s, a virus was sweeping the world and leaving its victims, very often children, unable to breathe, their chest muscles paralyzed. The answer was this: an enormous sealed metal cylinder, the size of a small car, into which the patient was slid up to the neck. The machine then changed the air pressure around their body, forcing their lungs to rise and fall for them. It saved lives. But for some, there was no recovery, and they remained sealed inside that metal tube, able to move only their head, for months, for years, and in a few extraordinary cases, for the rest of their entire lives. Row upon row of them once filled hospital wards, whole rooms of human beings kept alive inside machines, listening to the endless rhythm of the bellows that breathed for them. And number 1, the Transorbital lobotomy tool, the object we opened with. In the 1940s and 50s, a doctor named Walter Freeman became convinced he could cure madness by severing part of the brain, and he wanted a way to do it fast, without surgeons or an operating theatre. So he took an instrument shaped almost exactly like an ice pick. In the very beginning, he literally used one from his own kitchen, and he perfected a technique. He would lift the patient's eyelid, place the point against the top of the eye socket, and tap it through the thin bone of the skull with a small mallet. Then he would sweep it side to side, blindly, to cut the connections in the front of the brain. The whole thing took minutes. He performed it on thousands of people, the depressed, the anxious, the merely inconvenient, and among them a young woman named Rosemary Kennedy, who was left permanently unable to walk or speak properly for the rest of her life. Freeman drove across the country, demonstrating his ice pick cure like a traveling salesman, and for a time, the world called him a genius. So there it is, the cabinet, closed again, 10 objects, and every one of them was, in its moment, the very best that medicine had to offer. That is the part that should stay with you. These were not the tools of monsters. They were the tools of intelligent, well-meaning people doing the most they could with what they understood. And to the patients on the receiving end, that distinction meant nothing at all. Which leaves one last question worth sitting with. Every one of these objects was once considered ordinary, sensible, even kind. So of all the ordinary, sensible things sitting in our hospitals today, how many will end up locked in a cabinet like this one 500 years from now? Tell us which of these 10 disturbed you the most, down in the comments.